Governor Quinn gives lawmakers 3 more weeks on pension reform. We'll talk about it next on Capitol View. Good evening, and thank you for tuning in to this week's edition of Capitol View, the show where we talk about Illinois politics and government. I'm your host, Jamey Dunn with Illinois Issues, and with me today is longtime Statehouse watcher Mike Lawrence. Mike, thanks for being here.
Good to be here.
And Daily Herald Statehouse Bureau Chief Mike Riopell. Mike, thanks for coming.
Hi, Jamey.
We got an all-Mike show today.
That's
so,
right. Yeah.
So we're having the show today because there was a special session this week. Governor Pat Quinn, after the state's bond rating was downgraded twice in 1 week earlier this month, called a special session asking lawmakers to finally deal with pension reform. Mike, we didn't see that happen, but we saw a little bit of a development. Will you tell us what happened this week?
So they took one of the bills that would have cut pension benefits significantly and basically came to Springfield to kind of go through the hoops to agree to disagree. And the result of that is what's called a conference committee. It's a 10-member, bipartisan, Democratic-favored committee that now is supposed to meet in private and in public over the next 3 weeks and somehow come up with an amendment, a new piece of pension legislation that will fix everything in 3 weeks in this debate that's been going on for 2 years. So that's what happened. They formed a committee. It's more official than some of the other committees that have been around. Governor Pat Quinn had a committee last year. It was kind of an informal committee of people to meet and try and put this thing together. This is a formal legislative committee that can come up with a plan and send it to the House and Senate. Of course, a lot of the opinions that have led to the gridlock that exists on how to handle this $100 billion in pension debt still exist. So can this committee, somebody called it the Gang of 10, referencing the federal Gang of 8, can this Gang of 10 come up with a compromise? That will be the question of the next 3 weeks.
Well, and Governor Quinn came up with this idea, or at least publicly called for this idea last week. He also set the deadline of July 9th, hoping that the committee will have something ready by then. Those of us that haven't been around for a real long time haven't seen these before. Conference committee has sort of been relegated to the dustbin to some degree in recent years. But Mike, you've seen quite a few conference committees in your time. What have they been used for in the past, and what are they like?
Well, back in the 1970s and even past that, they were used, at least in part, for mischief. Some of the pension benefits, particularly special benefits that we've been talking about, the public's been drawn to, occurred as a result of those conference committees. You'd have all these committees going at one time at the end of the session, and then a report would pop out. Now, in some cases, those reports, which were in essence bills, were drafted by legislators, but there were times when they were drafted by lobbyists as well. And they would pop out at the end of the session. Again, there were scores of them going on. And the conference committee report, or the new proposed legislation, didn't have to have anything to do with the original legislation or even the dispute between the House and Senate that put the bill in conference committee. So you could get an entirely new bill out of it. Now, a lot of times, those of us who were interested in that type of activity at the end of the session, you would essentially, there'd be two signals that there was mischief in the bill. And when I say mischief, I mean special benefits or some legislation that ordinarily would have difficulty making it through. One was when the sponsor of the bill would mumble in explaining the bill. And the other alert, for some of us anyway, was when one of the members who might be in on the know and was not particularly pleased with what was going on wouldn't necessarily air his or her problem, but would say something like, I hope you all know what you're voting on. So it is ironic that some of those pension benefits, which will now not individually but collectively be the subject of this conference committee, were approved by other conference committees in the past. And one of the reforms that occurred after the 70s and part of the 80s was to do away with conference committees. By the way, that didn't do away with the mischief. The mischief makers would find other ways of getting through legislation that they thought was worthwhile.
Well, we're unlikely to see this time around any pension sweeteners in what's produced if something comes out of this conference committee. But Mike, if they come out with a report, what happens next?
Well, then it would have to be passed by the House and the Senate, just like any other piece of legislation. I think you just referenced they're not required to come up with something. They have to have a vote of 6 of these 10 to produce a piece of legislation that people could vote on. There's no guarantee that level of compromise will be achieved. And then if it is, there's no guarantee that whatever they come up with would be approved by the House and Senate. Of course, the whole reason we got to this point is because of the disagreement between House and Senate Democrats over how to tackle this pension problem. You know, will this committee resolve those differences in 3 weeks? Who knows? But that's what their goal is, to produce some kind of piece of compromise legislation, understanding that neither of the two House or Senate plans are going to be approved at this point. We're pretty much all agreed on that. Can they find a middle ground? That's what they're going to try to do. Even if they don't by July 9th, they can keep working on it. They can go back and try again. A new set of members could be appointed to the committee. So there are ways that this could like grind out for a very long time. So, you know, to what level will we get to know about, you know, like Mike was saying, you know, will there be mostly behind closed doors mischief? Will there be public hearings? At some point, legislation will pop out, and because it's the only one going on, everybody will be able to read it and know what's going on. But that's what we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, Mike's right on. In this case, I don't anticipate mischief the way I was using it. But the other thing to remember here is, on this issue, the leaders are still going to call the tune, in my opinion. They will, the members, I'm sure, will be checking with the leaders, their respective leaders, to see what they can buy, what they can't buy. And you still have, as all three of us know, a fairly significant philosophical difference here between the House and the Senate. I mean, I've seen a lot of coverage on the personalities. Are Madigan and Cullerton mad at each other? Are they feuding? Are they getting along? I think a lot of the differences do come because of a philosophic approach. And I think the other thing that's important is, particularly in the Senate, Cullerton's position is driven, at least in some measure, by the feeling in his caucus that they're tired of being dictated to by the Speaker of the House. They are an independent chamber. So you have that in the mix. However, I think there is a recognition that they need to take some pretty significant action here to solve this. And so maybe this will be a vehicle to do it. I think the fact that Governor Quinn has set a deadline of July 9th is probably a non-factor based on history here. I mean, he set a lot of deadlines, and you have a separate branch of government here. So, but the point is that there is some movement represented in this. I mean, some people will say, well, that's a naive interpretation. I hope I'm not naive after 50 years of watching the process, but I think this is a way to try to resolve this.
And to build on your point that the leaders will still be heavily involved, Senate President John Cullerton got to appoint the chairman. The chairman is Senator Kwame Raoul, who agrees with Cullerton's position. And Madigan, his 3 people on the committee all agree with his position. The Republicans could come into play in that case. The Republicans tend to agree with Madigan on this. They spent a lot of last year campaigning to fire Madigan and you know, beat Democrats. And but on this issue, a majority of Republicans are behind Madigan on this.
Well, and as Mike mentioned, Governor Quinn's deadline likely may not be met when it comes to pension reform. Senate President John Cullerton has said there's a good chance it's going to take longer than a few weeks. But Mike, there's another reason why this deadline date might be important. Can you explain that to us a little bit? The
reason is because the concealed carry, the court's deadline for lawmakers to approve concealed carry is coming up. Governor Pat Quinn is generally opposed to concealed carry. And a lot of people think he may veto the concealed carry bill that the House and Senate approved. If he does, then July 9th, legislators could try to override him. The prevailing thought is that they'd be able to. The vote totals in the House and Senate were enough such that they could if they hold up. Of course, there's never a guarantee that these things will work smoothly. Quinn could still sign the concealed carry bill. But July 9th could end up more being about guns and pensions at this point.
And Senate President Cullerton said this week that he expects Quinn to do an mandatory veto. Of course, Governor Quinn is not sharing those details yet, but Mike, the thought would be they would be back and they could take care of gun stuff and see if there's anything to do with pensions yet.
And who, you know, maybe, you know, what if this committee comes up with a pensions amendment by then? You know, the 9th could be a time for test votes or to talk about it or something. Even if they aren't ready, you will certainly see some talking about it.
You know, one of the interesting things about an AV, a mandatory veto on that gun bill, is if they don't override, will they have the votes to accept his changes? And if they can't override and yet can't accept his changes, then the bill is pretty much dead, right? So then you've got that federal appellate court decision, and many people would argue that would be leave Illinois wide open on the issue of concealed carry. Now, when the Speaker says we've got the votes to override them, he usually doesn't talk idly. He may not talk much, but when he talks, usually he means business. And I think it could turn into a real mess, though, that if there's an AV and then he's not overridden, and I can't believe the votes would be there to accept his changes as we sit here now,
right.
Then you've got that bill in what we used to call limbo, and that means it's not law.
So in theory, if the governor wanted to rewrite this thing and mandatorily veto it, you know, he could add restrictions, you know, where places where you couldn't carry a gun under this law. And I agree with you. You know, the negotiations over that were so long and so tense and like finely tuned that they finally got this bill that everybody could agree to. And it's very complicated. You could carry a concealed firearm, but not on transit unless it's in a locked case, and not in the Cook County Forest Preserve District, but it's okay in the DuPage County. You know, all these different kind of details to get the votes that they needed to get it passed. You tinker with any one of those things, and you could be leading to the trouble you're talking about.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, Governor Quinn has been fairly liberal with his veto pen in the past and has rewritten pieces of legislation to make them totally different bills than what they really were in the beginning. And Mike, the legislators have generally pretty strongly rejected it when he's done that, right?
Yeah, I agree. You know, if you know, I don't think he would do that in this case, but if he did, I mean, I don't think we'd be looking at a accept his changes situation. We'd be looking at try to veto override.
But we could potentially see a tacking on of, say, an assault weapons ban
sure.
or something
yeah.
along those lines.
Which has not gone well this year. I mean, you know, that has not even gotten off the ground. There's been a different proposal to limit the number of bullets in a magazine that has gotten some support, but not enough to make it through the Senate or even the House. So, yeah, say he wanted to put that on this bill, he absolutely could, but there has not been enough support for that, I don't think, to keep that. You know, there are plenty of gun control people who would like to keep that, and there might be an effort to do it, but that would be hard to believe, that being able to get through.
Well, Governor Quinn this week signed a piece of legislation to regulate what has been seen as kind of a controversial way to drill for oil and gas. It's called fracking, or hydraulic fracturing. And folks were saying that this is already coming to Illinois, and they wanted to see some regulations happening. But there's a strong contingent of people, especially based in southern Illinois, where fracking will most likely be taking place, that are pretty upset about this and would like to see a ban. Mike, Governor Quinn did not travel to southern Illinois to do a big bill signing, even though this was seen as like a triumph and a compromise and a very strong piece of regulation. Why might he not have gone there?
I think you hit the nail on the head. I think it remains controversial. I mean, he could have had planned this, bill signing to tout the compromise. Like you said, environmental groups were on board, however reluctantly, saying we don't like this, but we need the regulations, so we're going to sign on. Nevertheless, the governor doesn't want a ton of protesters to show up at this thing, and he's had this happen to him at bill signings in the past. So, like you said, we got a news release that it was signed. There was no fanfare. He didn't go to where the fracking would be done. I think it's just he can control the message better that way. You know, I mean, there are no protesters to get in the shot. You know, we were just talking before we came on the air about a news conference he had in Southern Illinois last year where union protesters showed up, and the location had to be moved a couple times. So he was trying to basically run away from them. So I think he just was avoiding that.
Well, and the anti-fracking people have turned out in pretty good numbers to protest all through the end of session at the State House. So he has had a taste of what they might be doing down there. Mike, as a former Southern Illinois resident yourself, what do you think of this whole thing?
Well, unless things have changed over the last few months, his name is Mud, not Quinn, in Southern Illinois. So, he's shut down prison. He's shut down some other facilities, actually 2 prisons down there. And he's not popular at all in that area. So I think it's been pretty clear he's steered away from Southern Illinois. He's, maybe by the time of the primary, people in Southern Illinois will have changed their views, and by that I mean Democrats in a primary. But I seriously doubt it. I mean, he has really damaged himself politically there. Now, whether he did the right thing governmentally or not, people can argue about that. But the way he did it and the way he went about doing it, I think really cost him politically. If not in the long run, certainly in the short run, and I think we're still in the short run phase of this.
But it would seem that Democratic lawmakers from Southern Illinois feel that there are folks in the area who support this bill. I mean, all the Democrats from Southern Illinois voted in favor of it and were strong backers of it. And typically lawmakers want to be seen with the governor. These Southern Illinois lawmakers, Democrats and Republicans, have been hypercritical of Quinn over these cuts. And if you look at the main media down there, they've been on him over, again, the closure of facilities and the way he went about doing it. So I can understand why these legislators may not want to be seen with him. You know, there'll be cameras there. There'll be, people will be taping. And if they're standing there with Quinn, it just might show up in a campaign commercial against them while they're running for re-election. Well, as we're kind of talking about elections, we'll move on to something that happened with the Republican Party this week. They had a little bit of an embarrassing flap. Montgomery County Republican Party Chair Jim Allen sent an email being critical of a GOP candidate, Erica Harold. It was, some people felt that it was racist and kind of sexist and very inappropriate, and it was made public. And Mike, what has been the fallout from this?
He has resigned from being a backer of Congressman Ronnie Davis. He was a backer of Ronnie Davis. Davis has denounced him. He's stepped down from his county chairmanship. It even attracted national attention. The National Republican Party chairman called for him to step down, and he since has. The kind of headline, this letter was sent to Doug Eibendahl. The headline, term, I guess, people have focused on is he called Erica Harold, former Miss America, a streetwalker, which did not go over well, predictably, was not a nice thing to say. And so Ronnie Davis, Erica Harold's opponent in the primary, had to back away from this as quickly as possible. Allen's name was on his website as a supporter, for example. That came down. Davis, I believe, had a conference call with reporters to denounce it. I was not on it, but I heard about it. So he's kind of had to walk away from that, even though he had nothing to do with it. Just that pure association has had to have him back off.
This episode reminds me of a quote from Voltaire that went something like this: "May God protect me from my friends. I can protect myself from my enemies." I've been on the inside of two pretty significant campaigns, and that quote came to mind more than a couple of times during those campaigns. The principals and even the chief campaign operatives can't control everything that goes on out there in the name of the operative or in support of the operative. And I think this is a classic example of that. It's unfortunate, but it was totally inappropriate. It was wrong. You can use every negative phrase on it, and you're not going to be wrong. And so I think it is wise that Ronnie Davis didn't mess around. He distanced himself immediately, and the national Republicans, they have enough problems in terms of attracting people of color and women without having a Republican county chairman do this kind of thing.
I think all those issues you're talking about are going to be in that primary race. That appears that it will be the big congressional primary race in Illinois, barring like a large Republican one for U.S. Senate or something like that. But as far as federal politics go, that'll be the primary race to watch this year.
Well, we're going to flip over to the Democratic side just for a little bit here. Everyone's kind of still waiting with bated breath to see if Lisa Madigan is going to run for governor. She said she's seriously considering it. But Mike, her decision will affect a lot of other parts of Illinois politics. For instance, leader Tom Cross may no longer be the leader. Can you tell us a little bit about how her choice might play into other areas?
Right. If she runs for Attorney General again, for example, if she were to make that decision, that would largely clear the field for that job. If she leaves into the governor's race to challenge Pat Quinn and perhaps Bill Daley, that opens a very high-profile job for a different up-and-comer in either party. And Tom Cross, like you said, has been said to maybe be wanting to run for that. He has not said either way yet. If he does, things start to shuffle around. So he would go to run for Attorney General, and to do that, he would leave the House Minority Leader job, which would then spark the candidacies of 4 or 5 people to try and get into Tom Cross's job. Mostly suburban Republicans: Tim Schmitz, Jim Durkin, Dennis Reboletti, Ed Sullivan. Mike Fortner from the suburbs is already trying to circulate rules for how to go about picking a new leader. Should there have to be one? So that kind of tells you how serious it is. But so yeah, her in both the governor's race, if she goes there, maybe Bill Daley would get out of it. He's only exploratory now. So there are a lot of moves like that right now that can set off a lot of other different things.
And Sheila Simon has said she would not run again for lieutenant governor, and she clearly has had her eye on the attorney general slot on the Democrat side. And she and Attorney General Madigan are pretty close and good friends, so a lot of people thought, well, that was a signal that Madigan indeed was going to run for governor. I don't, in my mind, I'm not ready to predict one way or another on whether the General Madigan will run for governor, but it certainly has some people at loose ends right now, you know, trying to figure out, you know, what moves they should make and in what direction.
It makes you wonder, you know, if does she get more headlines now while she's still kind of considering it than if she got in the race? If she got in the race, then it's June before a March primary. It's still a ways off. The field is set. Like, maybe we won't be paying so much attention to it. When she's still thinking about it, will she, won't she, will she, won't she, her name is in the news constantly. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know that that's a conscious decision, but I mean, to me, that's how it's playing out. You know, if she would just get in or not, that the dominoes would all fall and we'd kind of move on to the next thing. But for now, she's the headliner.
Well, we're going to have to leave it at that for this week. I'd like to thank my guests, Mike Lawrence and Mike Riopell, and I'm your host, Jamey Dunn with Illinois Issues. We'll see you next time on Capitol View.